Coming up on Talk is Cheap, we're going to look at NASA's black magic origins. What's it about? We got Lauren here to break it down. Up next on Talk is Cheap. Welcome to Talk is Cheap, where cheap is talk and talk is cheap. I'm your host, Dan Hopefeld, for episode 173, NASA's Black Magic Origins. To my left is Pete Hallblad.
How's it going, Dano? Episode 173.
Exactly.
Wow. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, man. I was looking at the temperature in the studio. It's 84 degrees, but we're just chilling.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, man, if you feel like you need to take your shirt off to cool down, go for it,
You've been
man.
trying to see me naked on all these episodes.
Dude,
Gay lovers?
I'm going to digress real quick here. Before we started this episode, I was outside talking to your parents. Your mom goes in the house and comes out and makes me take my shirt off.
That's a true story.
All right. That's a true story. That happened. And so I think turnabout's fair play, Dan. I digress. And what's really cool about tonight, Dan, tell us what's super cool about tonight.
Lauren is actually going to be hosting this episode. She's out in South Carolina, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, Lauren?
Yep, you got it.
All right.
Way past your bedtime, too.
Yeah, it's like 9 o'clock over there. 9:30.
Yep. So,
but for obvious reasons, we're going to just put your picture up. We had some technical difficulties earlier, so we're just going to keep it as an audio-only stream. And
you're stuck looking at Dan and I, folks. I'm sorry.
Or some slides.
Yeah. We'll try to keep the camera off us as much as we can.
So, all right, Lauren, I guess we'll give you the reins and take this episode where you want it to go.
Okay, guys. Yeah, and for people listening, there will still be some interesting pictures for you guys to look at as I go along, so no need to turn the video off. And thanks for having me on, Dan. It's good to be with you again. It's been a long time.
We've been trying to do this probably since February-ish.
Since February. It's been
showbiz takes time.
7 months, yeah. All right, so what I wanted to tell you guys about today is NASA's Black Magic Origins, a very interesting story about rocket scientist Jacques Parsons. And there's a common thread linking black magic and the United States space program. That common thread is named Jacques Parsons, and today I'm going to tell you about how he is the man responsible for bringing about the modern American UFO movement. So first I'll just tell you a little bit about his childhood. He was born Jacques Parsons as Marvel Whiteside Parsons. Yes, his first name was Marvel in 1914. And his mother later changed his name to John, but he was called Jack. And he came from a wealthy family in Southern California, old money, and he was always homeschooled by a governess until middle school. So he was definitely a really unique kid, and he's described by those who knew him best as good-natured, a people pleaser, and he had an inability to say no to people. He was sensitive, he loved art, classical music, and poetry. He loved science fiction magazines, which at that time were called pulp fiction, if that sounds familiar. And that was the early version of comic books. And he also had long hair and was always finely dressed no matter the occasion. And this was a quality that would later follow him into adulthood. And his friends even commented that he was always dressed well, even when they were blowing stuff up in the desert.
Wait, what were they blowing stuff up in the desert with?
Oh, we'll get to it.
Okay, awesome. I'm like, I love this guy so far. The way you've described him, I'm like, I want to be his friend, or I want, that's awesome.
Yeah, this might be the only history lesson you ever enjoy, Dan.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll hold you to that one.
Yeah.
You guys know how I love history class.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so he had a deep fascination with magic and the occult, and he had recorded a story in a letter that when he was a kid, he tried to summon the devil in his bedroom. And he didn't expound on what had occurred, but whatever happened, it scared him so badly that it prevented him from doing any more magic until adulthood. But unfortunately, we don't know the story. And so when he started attending public school and middle school, and he stood out like a sore thumb because of all the aforementioned interesting character traits. He was even driven to school in his grandfather's limo, which made him the center of attention for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah, I'd imagine so.
And because of this, he was beat up a lot, and kids would pull his hair and gang up on him, and he was a loner, and he would later look back on that time of his life with a lot of difficulty. But there was one friend that he made whose name was Foreman, and this guy actually stepped in and saved him from being beat up one time, and they became lifelong partners in crime, so to speak. And they became like soulmates right away. And the two boys spent all their free time talking about science fiction and designing rockets and building prototypes of rockets. Foreman's father was an engineer, so he had the tools, and Jack had the money to buy the additional supplies. And you have to understand that there was no such thing as rocket science at this time. This was the early 20th century. Yes, rockets had been used as weapons, and of course China had been experimenting with black powder for centuries, but the field of rocket science and space exploration did not exist as we know it today. And
yeah, think of that. It's like even just like 10, 15 years prior, there weren't even airplanes, right? You know, I mean, that's insane.
Yep. So for these guys, these boys, really, to be thinking in this way was pretty phenomenal. Space exploration was not even on the table. It wasn't a priority for the government and any government in the world at the time. There was some level of rocket science going on, but they didn't call it that per se. And it was more of a priority to try to create weapons rather than go into space to explore. But that was always Jack's goal, was to build a rocket that would go to the moon or to go into outer space.
To the moon.
Sounds a lot like Elon Musk in a sense.
Like,
you know, he's got
Dogecoin.
Yeah, there you go. Yep.
True. So his mom became worried that him and Foreman were going to blow themselves up, so he was sent away to military school. And while there, he blew up the toilets in the bathroom so that he would be sent home, and he was sent home.
What was his choice of munitions?
I'm not sure.
Well, I was thinking, so you're afraid that you're concerned your kid's blowing stuff up, so you send them to the military where they teach you to blow stuff up.
Yeah.
You know. Anyway, I find that ironic, but that's awesome.
Well, that's where he can get his aggression on, I guess.
Yeah, yep. And he blew up some toilets and got sent back home. So
Yep.
mission accomplished.
Definitely.
And of course, when he returned home, he and Foreman just continued their research and experimentation. And so when they were teenagers, both Parsons and Foreman regularly had long-distance phone conversations. You can imagine what the bill was like at that time. Exchange letters with the Nazi father of modern rocketry himself, Wernher von Braun. So they were exchanging information with Wernher von Braun even as teenagers.
Wow.
Yeah. So his wealthy family lost everything during the Great Depression after his grandfather died, as did many families in Pasadena at the time where they lived. And he got into Stanford, and he was working at Hercules Powder Company while trying to go to school, but had to drop out because he just couldn't afford it. But he proved to be not that great of a student anyway. He was just one of those learners that he was just super hands-on, and he was brilliant, but not in the academic way.
Sure, yeah, in the accepted modern for the time academic way, yeah.
Right, like he was just geniused out of traditional academics. So after dropping out of Stanford, he started working at Caltech, which stands for California Institute of Technology, and he helped to establish Gausset Rocket Research, and Gausset stands for the Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratory at the California Institute of Technology. And he was just a young man working at Caltech. So during World War II, the Gausset Rocket Research Project started receiving federal funding because it didn't take long for the government to catch on that these rockets could be weaponized.
And we got to blow up Nazis, so
Yeah.
let's do it.
Yeah. And with the help of the genius mind of Jack Parsons, they developed solid and liquid propellant units to assist the takeoff of heavily loaded aircraft and began work on high altitude rockets.
So they started by putting like basically boosters on airplanes that had heavy loads, and then went more vertical over time. It sounds like.
I suppose.
Yeah, that's maybe one way to say it, right?
Yeah, that's one way to say it. Yeah, and at the same time, Jack was experimenting with chemistry as well and trying to get the right mixture of rocket fuel. So he was doing both. It was the engineering side of the rocket itself and the fuel. Yeah, but at this time, space exploration was still, even after they were receiving federal funding, space exploration, the dream of Jack Parsons, was still relegated to the world of science fiction. So at the time...
What year was this again?
This would have been in the 1930s.
Okay.
So at the time, Parsons was only a sporadic part-time chemistry student at the University of Southern California. Like, they let him take classes for free while he was working at Caltech, but like I said, he wasn't a great student. But he and his friends that were doing these sort of tests with him and everything had gained a reputation around the USC campus, and as well as fame around Pasadena, and they were constantly blowing things up and almost blowing themselves up so often that they became known as the Suicide Squad. So Marvel Suicide Squad. So I think...
Oh, weird.
Yeah.
Cool. I like that. What's interesting too is like it seems like they were like the epitome of trial and error, right?
Oh, for sure.
Let's mix this batch up and see what happens. I love it.
Yes, Jack was super scientific about everything he did, as you'll see, and that's exactly what he did. He just never quit. He just tried and tried again. It was his dream, and he was going to see it through.
Mm-hmm.
So the Suicide Squad did the rocket testing at Devil's Gate near Pasadena. And there's supposedly an indigenous history of that area of Southern California. And the native tribes of that area were actually forbidden from getting too close to that part of the Arroyo Seco River where the dam and Devil's Gate are located. And that's how it got the name Devil's Gate, because...
Yeah, I got the picture up here now.
That's what it looks like now. It's all closed off.
So it's all locked up there? I mean, I'm sure people tried to get in there.
I'm trying to think of where else I've heard Devil's Gate before.
Yeah, it does sound familiar.
It sounds super familiar to me.
Apparently, that in the side of the mountain, it looks like the face of the devil or something. And so even the tribes people and the indigenous of that area stayed away from it. So, like, the weird vibes didn't...
So what is in there, though? Is it just a river?
I'm not sure exactly what's in there, but...
Why would they have to lock it,
There's probably still, in Jack's honor, a lot... Well, as I'll continue to inform you guys about his magical workings, I would imagine that people continued to go in there and do some stuff, And Jack believed it literally was a portal to hell, which is why that was one of the reasons he wanted to do his experiments there. And he even invoked the god Pan before every rocket test. Are you guys familiar with Pan?
Oh, he was the flute playing sheep man, right? Or something, right?
Yeah. He's supposed to be like the god of the natural world, basically. And but he's known as like a trickster god.
Oh, right on.
So like one of those you don't know, are they going to be good or are they going to be bad?
Yep. Or maybe good for most part and then get you at the end, right?
Yes. Which is ironic you say that. But a little forced.
But I'll tell you, Lauren, we are syncing up tonight. We are tracking on the same page even from our conversation before we started airing. So I'm liking this. This is great.
Okay, good. I'm glad. So on Halloween night of 1936, Jack Parson his suicide squad completed the first successful rocket test in Arroyo Seco, California. So that was the first time on Halloween night they got it lifted off. And in 1942, he founded Aerojet Corp, which is still a corporation. And,
cool.
Yeah, still heavily involved in the United States government. And he did later sell it, but he was one of the founding members of Aerojet Corporation. And
so,
then,
Lauren, quick question.
Okay.
When their first successful launch, did you come across any, like, how big was this rocket? Was it, like 6 foot, 10 foot, a big thing carrying a cargo? Did you come across anything that described that?
They actually didn't, in all the literature that I've read, get into those kinds of technical details.
Mm-hmm.
But I was reading more of things based on his life, not so much the science exactly.
Sure. Yeah,
So
yeah. No, that makes
sure
sense.
you could find something that is based solely on the science that would probably has all that in there.
Yeah. I'm sure it was scaled down too. I mean, they weren't launching, a 100-foot,
No.
Saturn rocket into the air out in the desert.
handle
I was just curious if you had come across that.
Yeah,
No.
that'd be a hell of a first time rocket. Let's make it big.
Yeah, right.
I think it was just like the first time where they got the size and the rocket fuel combination just right,
To actually get it up in the air.
Yeah. And
Very
actually, Galset became the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in 1944. And so JPL, some people say that stands for the Jack Parsons Laboratory.
Oh.
Yeah. And it was the institution that was to become America's first center for long-range missile development and space research.
So he was really on the forefront of this jet propulsion stuff.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
crazy.
He's like the father, the progenitor of American rocketry, really.
Mm-hmm.
And so some years later, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and it became a major part of NASA. So JPL was around before NASA was actually an organization. So they kind of just blended into each other. And so, as I was saying, Caltech and the Suicide Squad actually helped found rocketry as a field of study in America. And Caltech offered the first rocketry courses in America that people could take to study. And they had established a firm theoretical and experimental ground for rocketry and had helped make it a valuable science in the eyes of the government and the military. And to this day, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory hosts a yearly quote-unquote nativity party in honor of Parsons and the Suicide Squad on Halloween. And they,
how cool is that?
Yeah, what they do is they have these life-size cutout posters of the Suicide Squad, and they put them around, and they have this party in their honor. And they also had a crater on the dark side of the moon named after him. So
really,
yeah.
How does in your research did you find out how one gets invited to this party that you're talking about?
I got to do some kind of ritual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have a lot of money or be super smart in rocketry, maybe. Right?
Yeah, I would assume you have to work at JPL or.
Well, if you ever come across, some VIP tickets to this party, let me know.
Well, that would be a fun episode, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would.
They probably really know a lot of things at that party. That would be
you'd probably go there and feel really stupid, as you're trying to have conversations with people there.
Oh, I definitely would.
And I'm guessing it's probably not the kind of party that I'm thinking of.
Oh, yeah.
So, I'm sorry, Lauren. I digress.
They make it sound innocuous, but I'm sure
His mind is in the gutter right now.
Oh, yeah.
it should be, because we're about to get. I should have
Oh, yeah.
given a little preamble at the beginning that this episode is not appropriate for children. If anybody's children is listening, we are.
I think people figured that out when we started swearing again on the show. So.
Oh,
All right. Well, no, but we do appreciate that disclaimer, and it really, for some folks, it probably really piqued their interest, including mine. So I can't wait to see where we're going to go with this.
How are you?
Well, the Suicide Squad eventually dissolved, and Parsons soon found his way to a Gnostic black mass of the Church of Thelema. And I'm sure you guys recognize Thelema from your Aleister Crowley episode.
Mm-hmm.
And he was already somewhat familiar with Crowley because obviously Crowley at the time was sort of famous, known as, Britain, known in Britain as the wickedest man alive and that sort of thing. But after this black mass and an initiation into Thelema, he had found his tribe, so to speak. Like the Suicide Squad had kind of broken up and everybody had gone their own direction. So he was looking for his people, and he found them at the OTO. So he officially joined the OTO, which is the Ordo Templi Orientis, and he started studying Crowleyism in earnest at that time. And like I said before, he approached magic the same way he approached rocketry, with his entire being. He was consumed by both science and magic and believed they were intrinsically linked. And in 1942, he took over the Los Angeles Lodge of the OTO called the Agape Lodge. And let's see. At his personal mansion, Jack hosted orgy parties and black magic rituals.
All right. You had me at orgy, but go ahead.
No, of course.
His personal mansion was deemed the parsonage, which is supposed to be a play on words because a parsonage is a Christian.
It's where the preacher lives, right?
Yeah, where the minister lives. Yeah, for a church, right? So, and I'm sure you guys already know, but sex magic is a huge aspect of Crowleyism. And Jack began a series of sex magic rituals called the Crossing of the Abyss, which Jack himself described as, quote, 40 days of madness and horror, which was supposed to transform him into, quote, the master of the temple. And the last of Crowley's disciples before Jack to attempt this series of rituals was found wandering the streets naked, having lost his mind.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And Jack, like Crowley, was also fond of taking a variety of drugs to be able to enter an altered state of mind. And he even wrote a poem that says, I live on peyote, marijuana, morphine, and cocaine. I never knew sadness, but only a madness that burns at the heart and the brain.
That sounds good.
So that really summarizes his drug use there.
All right, I'm back to being interested in this party you were talking about earlier, just so you know.
Lots of parties going on. Yeah. I'll get into it. So lots of different types of people live there, like at his mansion, the parsonage, like artists, bohemians, other science fiction types, science fiction writers, and of course other Thelemites. Jack and the other Thelemites and housemates and prostitutes regularly engaged in sex magic. There were a number of disturbing reports from neighbors and visitors to the parsonage. The neighbors filed a complaint when they saw a pregnant woman leaping through a fire 9 times. A 16-year-old boy reported to the police that he had been forcefully sodomized during a ritual, which was disregarded by the police after an investigation. But I believe he was probably telling the truth, because if you can think in the late 1930s, early 1940s, what, going to the police as a young man to say that you had been raped, essentially.
That's that is just a recipe for just ostracization in your community and rejection by your family and everything.
So I don't know. I don't think that at that time that a young man would have made that up.
It's unlikely for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've even read that Jack engaged the house dog and his mother both in sexual activities for the sake of
oh my goodness.
ritual. Yeah. I don't.
Jack did?
Yeah.
Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
this party might not be what I'm looking for after all. But go ahead.
It's a little extreme there.
When we're talking about sex magic, and Crowley did this too, it's a perversion to the highest degree. We're not talking about Studio 64 type orgies where everybody's just having a good time. You know what I mean? This is supposed to be a perversion and an inversion of what the Christian God deemed as, acceptable sexual behavior. So Crowley also engaged in every kind of sexual perversion that you can imagine for the sake of
the perversion, right?
power. Yeah, it's the perversion of it. So
Well, it's probably about corruption. If you can get people to do some crazy stuff.
Okay. And I don't want to get too far off topic here. This is absolutely intriguing, but we're talking, the 1930s, 1940s, and today when you bring up, child sex trafficking rings and stuff like that, you're like, oh, you're crazy. That doesn't happen. And here we've got a prominent NASA originator that, that is doing this. I mean, it's disheartening. It's very hard to wrap your mind around.
Yeah. It is. It's hard for me to read things where people don't believe that the human trafficking and child sex trafficking really does go on. And it has been going on, and our American government has been part and parcel to it and active participants in it since the very beginning.
Yeah, this is a part of that historical record.
Yeah.
I mean, this is documented. Do I even go as far as to say as proof that this has been occurring at the upper echelons for a century now.
It's all public.
Yeah, I would totally agree. So just as Crowley referred to himself as the Great Beast 666, Jack began to refer to himself as the Antichrist. And in my opinion, Crowley more or less used Jack, and Crowley, he used everybody really, but he would talk trash about his followers behind their backs. And he even called Jack and another associate an idiot. He called Jack an idiot to another Thelemite in a letter. And, that just kind of shows his character, because Jack was like a huge fanboy of Crowley's.
And Crowley was a manipulator, like that. Everything that you kind of read about him, he was, into that manipulation of people. He liked his followers. He liked having followers. He didn't necessarily like his followers. And, at this point, I'd be interested to know, I know Jack came from money. They lost the money in the Depression. I'd be curious just to be able to take a peek at his bank account during this time and see if that's why Crowley was keeping him around.
Yes, that is part of the reason he kept him around. Yes, because Jack was bankrolling the activities going on in California. And Jack's bank account ebbed and flowed. He did run into some bad luck at times and stuff, like everybody does, but he was well off for the most part, but he had to work for it. Like when he lost the family fortune, he had to make astute business choices just like everybody else. So, but Crowley was definitely using him for that. Mm-hmm. And so in his writings, in Jack's writings, there's a man that he referred to as the mysterious Freighter X. And for a long time, people didn't know who Freighter X was, but Freighter X was actually L. Ron Hubbard, the creator of Scientology. And at the time, Hubbard was just a science fiction writer, but he and Jack met and became bosom buddies right away. And Hubbard moved into the parsonage, okay? And at the time, Jack had a girlfriend who he absolutely adored named Betty. But Hubbard and Betty started shacking up, and they started a very intense sexual relationship, which wasn't behind Jack's back or anything, because it was the house rule of the parsonage was free love, and everybody was in open relationships. But behind closed doors, Jack was kind of devastated, not necessarily about the sexual part, but that Betty was spending all her time with Hubbard. So he was upset over it, but he decided to just move on and do something different. And this didn't affect his relationship or his friendship with Hubbard either. In fact, Hubbard was intricately involved in Jack's next and most important set of magical workings. Later on, Hubbard and Betty actually stole thousands of dollars from Jack, and soon thereafter, Hubbard officially started the Church of Scientology. So Hubbard wasn't to be in Jack's life for much longer after this, but he played a pivotal role in this magical working. And many have accused Hubbard of manipulating Jack into giving him magical secrets and showing him how to do rituals that were far beyond his experience, which Hubbard then later exploited and used to start the Church of Scientology.
Which is messed up. We all know that. Wow.
Yeah. He was super manipulative, just like Crowley. So.
That's how they do it.
Yeah. And I even read a biography about Betty. I'm sure she regretted her decision to leave with Hubbard. For all Jack's faults, you know, and weirdness, he was good to her, you know, and Hubbard was incredibly cruel, as you can imagine. But anyway, this is where Jack's famous Babylon working begins to take shape, okay? So Jack declared that it would be his personal mission to open the pathway for Babylon, the whore of Babylon referred to in the book of Revelation in the Bible. The whore of Babylon in the Bible rides a beast, so it's all very antichrist in that it's a mockery of Christian belief, and the whore rides on the back of the great beast. And remember, Crowley called himself the great beast 666, so it comes back to Crowley. So, unable to trust women at this point because before Betty, he had another girlfriend, Helen, which was actually Betty's sister, who actually left him with another guy also. So he was kind of over it. And so he decided to summon an elemental to be his sex magic partner for this very important series of Babylon working rituals. And what that consisted of, manifesting his elemental included masturbating on his paper tablets, which was witnessed by some people who lived in the house, and he was using his wand to draw pentagrams in the air and speaking in the Enochian angel language and things like that. So I'm sure it was pretty
intense.
Pretty intense.
Oh,
And this
yeah.
went on for, I believe, some weeks, and the paranormal activity really ramped up in the house, so much so that the residents who were there who were themselves Thelemites and practicing black magic actually got scared about what Jack was doing. Jack reported a windstorm that blew all the windows open and stuff in the house, and Hubbard got knocked and his arm was paralyzed for the night, and Jack also heard a mechanical voice say, "Let me go free." So there was a lot of weird stuff going on in the house, but
yeah, that would get me out of the house too, I think.
yeah, they were actually going out into the desert in California to do some of these rituals, and after the final ritual, basically, he had come home, and a woman named Marjorie Cameron, also known as Candy, was awaiting him. And he had written to Crowley that he had summoned his elemental, and her name was, she was an artist called Candy. And she was an artist and free spirit type who had male family members that worked at Caltech, and that's how she had heard about Jack's legendary weirdness and the parsonage, and she was actually eager to check it out for herself and to get to know him better.
Mm-hmm.
So Candy and Jack apparently spent a whole week in his bedroom doing sex magic, preparing the way for Babylon.
Oh, good job, Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one way to play that.
Yeah. And so at some time during the course of all of this, Hubbard channeled a message from a red-haired, green-eyed angel ordering them to, quote, light first flame at 10 p.m., March 2nd, 1946. The year of Babylon is 4063, and that would be 2118 BC, but I'm not sure what the significance of that date is. At this point, after the channeled message, they knew they were to summon a demon child, or a Gaborum, is what it's called, that Babylon, the spirit of Babylon, would inhabit. And at this time, Hubbard became the scribe for Jack and kept all of the notes of his workings. So Hubbard was actually present for all of the sex magic rituals with Candy out in the desert. Not exactly sure what all they did.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But Jack wrote a book called The Book of the Antichrist. And he wrote a book about the Babylon workings that were more of a stream of consciousness rather than describing what went on. But after, during the course of the rituals, which took some months, in early 1946, I believe, in the spring of 1946, Babylon appeared to Jack in a dream and called itself Hilarion. And Hilarion is actually what we now know, or those of us who have been involved in the New Age, as an ascended master, or part of the Great White Brotherhood. And that actually comes back to Thelema as well. After Jack's death, Candy actually took on the name of Hilarion, but some suspect that this was an individual named Hillary. I don't think so, but there are some who theorize that he had summoned Babylon into a woman named Hillary that we all know of.
Yeah, careful! Don't say that last name. You'll get suicided. Yeah. So
I know.
Just
exactly.
I was waiting. I was like, don't say it. Don't say it.
We talked about this earlier.
Mm-hmm. So the theory that I agree with the most actually came across a blog from an astrologer that theorized what they actually summoned was the feminist movement, like capital F. Yeah, capital F feminist movement. And if you compare the capital F feminist movement with the qualities ascribed to the Whore of Babylon in the Bible, the similarities are quite striking, and it all ties back to Crowley, of course. So after the Second World War, Jack began to explore communism, which put him on the government's radar for the wrong reasons. So I am going to come back to, in effect, they believed that the ritual worked. It took some time, but they did believe that the Whore of Babylon was inhabited on the earth, that when they finished their ritual, that some woman somewhere was pregnant with the Whore of Babylon. Okay? So there was some other stuff going on in Jack's life at the time, and like I said, he had been exploring communism, and so he was on the government's radar for other reasons besides rocketry at that time. And his job that he was working at the time had given him the highest level of security clearance available as a civilian in all branches of the military. So that's a pretty high clearance.
Yeah, that's an honor and a ranking there that not many folks enjoy. That's for sure.
So for him to be associated with communism, he was definitely nervous. He never formally joined the local chapter, which was to his benefit during the Red Scare, obviously, and McCarthyism. Mm-hmm. He never formally did. But in 1950, he was investigated for his ties to communist groups and because he had actually stolen sensitive documents from his employer to create a proposal for a job in Israel. So basically he was giving sensitive information to Israel. So
before it was cool to give sensitive information to Israel.
Yeah. And he, of course, lost his job. And actually, that's, as I said, his finances ebbed and flowed and he became broke again. He was actually working at a gas station pumping gas and as a mechanic to make ends meet. So that was in 1946, and of course, by 1947, there were en masse UFO sightings in America as well as abductions. So this is where we get into the legacy of the Babylon working. Mm-hmm. As we know, in 1947, Kenneth Arnold spotted those 9 UFOs over Mount Rainier. And then there were those UFOs over the Capitol building, Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. In 1947, there was the Roswell crash. And I'm not exactly sure the circumstances, but the government actually had a sit down with Parsons around this time, after all this stuff started happening, and sort of put him under the spotlight and said, look, does this have anything to do with your rituals? And he admitted that it did. And he actually said that all the sightings in Roswell and abductions were not coincidental. And he said the UFOs will introduce Crowleyism to the world.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah.
Which they really didn't, or did they?
They're in the process right now, according to the leak of the damn report.
Okay, yeah.
I believe so.
False flag alien invasion.
Yep. So their reports were UFO sightings before 1947, and when I had a subscription to newspapers.com in the course of my studies for my degree at the time, so I was doing a little digging and looking, and actually there were no mentions of flying discs before 1947 unless they were talking about skeet shooting. So it really actually did, by all evidence, ramp up after 1947. And in Passport to Magonia by Jacques Valle, he's a very famous sort of paranormal and UFO writer. Passport to Magonia is about the history of UFOs, abductions, and trickster spirits, basically. And the cover even has a gray alien with many different masks on, and he sort of investigates the worldwide phenomenon of abductions and how they're connected to fairy lore and things like that. So this sort of thing did happen before. So I believe that the Babylon working really opened the door for the modern American UFO movement. Even so, what he was doing to summon his elemental was actually called Enochian magic, which was created by John Dee. I don't know how familiar you guys are with John Dee, but he was the astrologer and magician to Elizabeth I of England, and he was an alchemist, an astrologer, a mathematician, and he created Enochian magic, which is still very popularly used today. But John Dee had reported seeing little men in their fiery vehicles. And that was in the 1600s, obviously. So let's see. There's also a strange connection to the 9 UFOs over Mount Rainier. And 9 is actually an important number in LaVeyan Satanism. And then Whitley Strieber, in his book Communion, describes the 9 knocks on the side of his house, which is what, was the beings letting him know that he was about to be abducted. So I just thought that was...
Okay, they just like knocking on the door or the side of the...
They were like literally knocking on the side of his house. 9 mechanical knocks. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So essentially, Jack takes credit for the modern UFO movement in America. But in 1952, he was actually killed in a tragic accident. He had sold his mansion, but part of the agreement for the sale was that he would still be able to live and work in the carriage house. So it was like a detached garage, right? And he was in there working. He and Candy were about to go on a trip to Mexico, which he said was to join an artist commune. But there is some whisper that he was working with the Mexican government on rockets, or some sort of covert operation down there in the Mexican desert. And he was working with mercury in a coffee can, and they aren't sure what happened, but he exploded himself. His jaw was blown off, the lower part of the arm that was holding the can, and all the skin on his legs was blown off. And that was June 17th, 1952, almost exactly 69 years ago. And he actually survived long enough to get to the hospital. Yeah, so he lived like that for a period of time. He wasn't immediately killed. And when they were trying to ask him what happened, all he could do was moan and groan, and obviously couldn't speak because he have a lower mandible to do that. So his mother was so upset that she immediately swallowed a bottle of prescription pills and killed herself within hours of Jack's death.
Oh, that's commitment.
Yeah. And Candy, later on in life, in an interview, had said that she believed that Jack was attempting to summon a homunculus or a golem. And a homunculus is described as a little man that can do your bidding. Basically, kind of what people believe the Greys are, like a combination of organic materials that are programmed to take and execute orders, like robotically. So that's
okay.
Homunculus is. So his death was ruled an accident, but there is also theories that he was suicided, that he was, assassinated. So the feds, right after his death, just like with Nikola Tesla, rushed in and collected all of his notes and data, and all of that is still classified even to today, 70 years later. So the long-term effects of the Babylon working and Jack's foundational role within the NASA programs is that Jack is the common thread which ties everything together. And there is a group that Nick Redfern, are you guys familiar with Nick Redfern? He's on like a lot of...
Not sure as hell is.
He's on a lot of different TV shows and stuff, like Ancient Aliens and stuff like that. But
I don't watch that stuff.
He's a credible journalist, though, and he wrote this book called Final Events. Final Events tells us about the Collins Elite covert government agency that was formed by guys that had investigated Jack when he attempted to steal sensitive documents for Israel. And it was then that they took notice of his reputation as a black magician. And the Collins Elite then discovered that Jack had been interrogated by the government already about his connections to UFO sightings and abductions. So the Collins Elite set about trying to figure out what these things are. So they were a group that were set outside. They were part of the government, but they didn't have like an overseer. They were sort of an independent group within the government. They didn't even receive a lot of funding at first, so it wasn't as if the government had a lot of interest in this. But these were some guys that had already been familiar with what Jack was doing and then knew about his connection with the UFO sightings and abductions and wanted to figure out exactly what these things were. And Nick Redfern claims that he has seen with his own two eyes documents summarizing the findings of the Collins Elite. And one of them is called New Mexico Origins, Parsons, Hubbard, and the Babylon Working, and another is by the CIA titled Parsons, Von Karman, and Goddard, A Door Unlocked. So those are official documents from the government. The Collins Elite also discovered through their contacts and the interviews they had conducted and the research that they had done over decades that the crash at Roswell in 1947 was actually a Trojan horse. It was planted supposedly by the beings that Jack had contact with, that we would call extraterrestrials, that it was actually planted there as a ruse to make humans believe in extraterrestrials, that there was something out there. They also became familiar with something called the Parsons technique, is what our government called it. And it's a magical technique of closing doors, opening doors to the spiritual realm and closing doors. And what the government came to believe was that the magician who opened the doors had to be the one to close them. But since he was dead, the covert black budget government agencies took over and attempted to use black magic in the same manner. And according
Sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, right? And according to the Collins Elite, went even so far as ritual human sacrifice to be able to communicate with the beings responsible for UFOs and abductions. And supposedly, someone on the team at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base had manifested, through magical working, the same sort of material that was found at Roswell. But then, when he lost his concentration and the ritual ended, the material disappeared. So the U.S. government believed it could somehow extract supernatural knowledge of technology from these beings.
Interesting.
Yeah. And the beings, which came to be called by these agencies ultra-terrestrials or interdimensionals, communicated only through black magic rituals. So there was no other way to communicate with them. And there was no face-to-face meetings with these beings. It had to occur through channeling, psychic mediums, automatic writing, and trance states brought on by hypnosis or psychoactive substances like mescaline.
Sure, that's a page right out of Crowley's book there.
Yeah, exactly. And this could be why MKUltra was experimenting with LSD and deprivation. Another project came about known as MKOFTEN, which sought to figure out if the occult and black magic could be weaponized and used in intelligence operations, such as using psychic powers to cause people to have heart attacks at a distance. Supposedly, members of the Collins Elite witnessed pictures of test subjects that had actually accidentally been murdered by psychic means. In other words, our government entered into a Faustian pact, a deal with the devil, if you will. And I'll just quickly read you a quote from Final Event. It says, "The conversations always followed broadly similar ground, namely that the human race was being deceived into believing that it was receiving visitations from aliens, when in reality, demonic forces were secretly squaring up for Armageddon and the final countdown, and the DoD's overwhelmingly reckless dabbling into occult-driven areas to try and make a bizarre but futile pact of some sort with these same forces was inevitably and only destined to make things much, much worse for each and every one of us."
That's like profound, and it actually introduces a whole nother concept, right? This isn't aliens we're talking about. This is demons, which is like a huge about face, right? At least in my mind, right?
And of course, we know that von Braun had told Carol Rosin that he had quit NASA because he had discovered this for himself, that all of this about militarizing outer space to protect America and to protect mankind, it's all to just control us, actually.
Sure, smoke and mirrors, right?
Yep,
right?
That they knew it was a lie, that there aren't extraterrestrial contact. I mean, I don't doubt that there are extraterrestrials, but that's not what this is what the theory is. And that they're basically using the excuse of extraterrestrials and their Faustian pact with these spiritual beings to control Earth's population to bring about the New World Order, which is not conspiracy theory. It's been we've got world leaders all over the planet that are reference it by name, New World Order, you know. Exactly.
How much did you have left? Because we're already up to 57 minutes.
Are you serious?
Yes, I'm serious.
That was pretty much it.
Okay. I fell asleep a half hour ago.
I tried.
Lauren, I honestly found it super interesting, and I've been jotting down notes. I've been looking on my phone, Googling stuff as you've been talking, because I'm like, I gotta look into this. So I've been riveted this whole time.
I'm so glad. I wonder if Dan's gonna cut it down to 30 minutes.
Well, I can leave it, but I can't guarantee the audience will stay for it.
We'll see.
Listen, if they're not interested, then that's on them. It's their loss. You know.
I don't know. The other thing is trying to make it entertaining too for an hour.
Well, I like I said,
It's more if it's an audio podcast, it's fine because people can throw it on and do whatever.
Yeah. Well, add some animations.
No, that's more work.
you know, these things aren't supposedly, according to the Collins Elite, aren't what we have been told that they are by the government. And all of this stuff about they don't know what they are, they don't know what's going on is a complete fabrication. And they're just waiting for the opportune time to stage a false invasion or a false abduction and control us with
everybody. Yeah, because we'll run to the urban centers and say, please, government, protect us.
I do believe that this is the card and they're going to play it. Like Carol Rosin says too, this is the last card.
Yeah.
Lauren, you've given me I've heard rumblings about that theory. I've never really heard it put together quite as nicely as you did. Especially just starting with Jack and NASA just blows my mind and just reinforces other things that I've kind of come across as I've gone on this adventure called my life.
Pretty good, huh?
Mind is, yes, it is. My mind is like, I'm not going to say 100% blown, but at the good 80% blown right now because I have got all sorts of additional stuff I need to look into and get into this because it's scary. It makes a little bit of sense, and a lot of this you can prove it. It's out there. Documentation, the evidence is out there. So.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to wrap it up right there. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you, Lauren, for doing that topic. Great to connect again. It's been a little while.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, so with that being said, what was it, our last episode?
July 9th.
No, August.
Oh,
August 6th.
2 weeks from today, and we'll see you guys then. Later.